Nancy and I feel very honored to be here, and thank you to Paul and Johanna for inviting us. I appreciated Matthew's presentation and how he talked about how the complexity of how we pull out one aspect and try to study that aspect. Like, is it the nature? Is it the relationship in nature? Is it the context of an alternative to traditional therapy? And we were faced in California with a problem, like a unique problem that we worked to solve. And so we came up with a framework that is working very well for us. And as Johanna said, I've read a little bit about your system, but we're offering this with humility. You know, some things may apply, and we hope that it is useful. And some things you might think Americans are crazy how they do healthcare, and you're lucky you don't have to solve the problems that we're solving, because they're pretty intense. But anyway, we're excited to be here, and we did develop this method through a really deep level of experience. And I'll start with just my own background. I am not a psychologist or a therapist or a credentialed school teacher. I started as a mountain guide. So I've been a mountain guide for 44 years. I was a certified rock climbing guide when I was 15 years old. So, which they wouldn't allow now because of all the lawyers, but in 1978 or 77, it was allowed. I was a guide for the Sierra Club, certified for the Sierra Club. And my entire work for my whole life has been around the deep conviction that immersive experiences in nature were transformational, that people change when they have these experiences. And I was, as a guide, I was chief guide of the Yosemite Mountaineering School, so the largest rock climbing school in America. In Yosemite, I was guiding El Capitan and all the big cliffs. But I also guided in Peru and Patagonia and Alaska. Never Europe, but I've climbed in Europe. And I saw everything. I saw people have the most transcendent peak days possible. I saw people be petrified with fear and anguish and crying and every emotion. So I think there is a lot of mountain guiding experience that could be like being a therapist. But in this work, I've taken a lot of continuing education credits in psychology. So, all right, I'm going to hit this. So the overall organization that we founded started 15 years ago, and we did a lot of environmental literacy programming. And so over 15 years, we've had 25,000 students, youth, come through our programs. So it's a big number. So we'll have like 90 high school kids come up from San Francisco. It's a 3-hour bus ride, and we're up at the crest of the Sierra, and we have this beautiful lodge, and they'll do field science, eco-literacy programming. And that's called Sierra Experience. The other side, Four Roots Wellness, which Nancy is the director of, we are doing classes in the school district in our local area for special needs kids. So kids in the continuation high school. In America, if you get kicked out of high school, you go to continuation high school. Or you maybe just want to go there. You're getting bullied, or you're falling behind too much. It's like a special school, special ed. We also did field trips for kids with serious emotional disturbance. And 10 years ago, so we did that for 5 years, and we witnessed how challenging it was for kids to access mental health treatment. So in the American system, if you are on public health, if you're on Medicaid, you're too poor to have insurance, and you have the government insurance. In our town, you go to the building, it's called the Joseph Center for Therapy. And you walk in the front door, and the court is on the left. The court. So where that kid went to court when he got arrested, or that mom went to court when her child was taken away from her. Then you go to the second floor, and there's Child Protective Services who took the kid away 2 years ago before she had to go to court. In the back of the building is the sheriff. And then you go a little further in the probation office. So after you come out of jail, you're there. To the third floor, where there's a very nice therapist in a windowless room with not enough time to see anybody. It's a long wait list. There's a psychiatrist too, comes 1 day a week to our town. So that is typical of rural America and behavioral health. They co-locate healing with law enforcement. That's it. Every town has that. So it's very strange. So our kids didn't do therapy, and we're talking about, we would see kids, have a suicide attempt, like really serious situations. They'd go to the hospital. They'd come back. They'd be in our field trip program. They'd be in Nancy's class, like a yoga class, she did peak health and empowerment for young women. She did adventure challenge, mindfulness, indoors, and we would take them climbing outdoors. And we'd see these kids, and they're like, I'm waiting 2 months to see a therapist. And then they go once, and they go to that building, and they don't want to ever go again. So that was the environment we were operating in. So the government funding occasionally puts money out for innovation. So like we want to fund experiments, try a new thing and see if it works. And so we're like, we want to do an experiment. So in addition to being a climber, I've been a social entrepreneur for 32 years. So this is my third business. And I was like, we have a good idea. So we started Whole Hearts, Minds, and Bodies. And it's nature-based therapeutic mentoring. I'll tell you all about it. But cut to today, 3.5 weeks ago, or a month ago, October 18th, in the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association declared a state of national emergency for youth mental health. So the trends since we started, that's really the trend line looking back 10 years, depression, anxiety, suicidality, suicide attempts, and suicide, drug use have all been going up in kids. The COVID pandemic made it go like that, like a hockey stick up. And this data just came out. So it's very serious. Now I read, Yasmina gave me some reports about Denmark. And for 10 years, it's also been going up. But I haven't seen, that was 2010 to 2018 for 8 years, what I read. It didn't have very much about this year, but maybe not as steeply as in the United States. So there will never be enough therapists and psychiatrists to meet the need. Like the need is like this, and the number of therapists and licensed professionals is like that. And especially if they're going to be in government buildings that have stigma all over, you don't even want to park there unless you're paying a traffic ticket or picking up your friend after going to court. So one thing this report said is they needed new solutions, innovation and action to improve access to quality of care, community-based. And that's the important piece. Community-based and person-centered. So a little more on the numbers in California. Only 5% of kids on the public health system receive behavioral health care. Only 35% of kids who say they want care receive care. So 65% of kids need help and don't get it. Most of the kids in our jails have behavioral health issues, 70%. And strangely, California, which is the 8th largest economy on the planet Earth, in the United States is ranked 33rd in mental health care for kids. Like the prevalence of mental illness and the access to care. So that's pretty embarrassing if you hang out in San Francisco, right, like I do, except I live in the mountains. So it's a strange situation. Part of the problem is the way the system is set up for professionals, for medical professionals, to treat the issues that kids are having, is it's very disempowering. And I know that your work at this center, talking to Paul, there's a lot of emphasis on what youth need. And I did hear that they would, in the hallway, that there's also a need to hear from youth more. more youth voice. And that would be good. Maybe the next conference have young people here to speak. So kids want autonomy. They want to make their own decisions. They do not want adults telling them what to do. And this framework of being able to offer treatment within that context is really helpful. They want to feel in control. And yeah, the kids who are struggling, the kids in trouble, the kids with emotional disturbance or mental illness symptoms, a lot of them have had this for a long time, and they're having so many experiences of adults saying, like, you need to change, you're a bad kid, you're expelled from school, you're having time out, you're, all these things, or more serious. One more thing about our system that I think is really important. In California, there's a big emphasis on the science of adverse childhood experiences. So the kids that we are working with, 95% of them have clear histories that when you learn about their history, it makes sense how they're acting today. They're having a rational response to a horrible history, right? If you really look at it that way. It might be difficult to deal with. It might be very disruptive in school. It might be scary and violent, but some of the abuse and trauma that kids have in very low-income households or households where there's drug abuse or alcohol abuse or sexual abuse or all these things, it's extreme trauma. And if they're 10 years old and acting out, it's very easy to understand that. So the path of treating them has to be a partnership. You can't just be like imposing it. And that, unfortunately, their experience is being medicated and having treatment imposed. So our program, Whole Hearts, Minds, and Bodies, we started 10 years ago. It is 7 licensed therapists supervising 26 well-trained, well-paid paraprofessional therapeutic mentors who each treat 2 or 3 youth. That's it. We drive alone in our car to the school bell rings, pick the kid up, go outside 2 to 3 hours. We drive to the trailhead, we're in the forest. If it's pouring rain or a snowstorm, we just go to a cafe, we might journal. We spend the time with them. We feed them and bring them home, to their house, and do it again next week. And it's simple, but it's kind of revolutionary in our system. Most people in America are extremely paranoid to be alone with a child. And we're alone with an emotionally disturbed child. But it helps that we have the risk management of mountain guiding, taking, heart surgeons ice climbing. We can take children in a car to a trail, The method has had a lot of success in a number of ways. And I'll start by just talking about our retention rate. Because half of our youth are youth of color, or Latinx youth or Hispanic youth coming from Mexico or South America. And youth of color, research shows, are 50% less likely to engage in therapy. If they might do it once and never go back, than white people. Although adolescents are not that impressive in engaging in therapy. In America, for the public health system, for Medicaid, the average engagement with therapy is 1.4 visits. That's it on the national level. 1.4 is not enough. So we peaked in September with 62 kids getting treated like this every week. 91% are still doing weekly sessions after 6 months, and 69 to 71% after a year. So they stay with it. They love the program. They stay with it. They get, 6 to 18 months of weekly engagement. And let me back up a minute. These kids are the highest need kids. So today we have a wait list of 26 kids. We're doing that hockey stick thing in our community. We have like 52 kids. We had some successful graduations this fall. 52 kids today, 26 wait list. The school psychologists and the hospital and the counties do not refer a kid who just has depression, or anxiety. They have to be debilitated by symptoms, self-harming, violent, disruptive, kicked out of school, in jail. Many people call us and we don't put them on our wait list. We send them somewhere else. Sadly, there aren't a lot of other options. But yeah, so these kids are very serious cases, and our retention rate is really good. The framework and the method we've developed, we call 4 roots for growing a human. And root number 1, authentic relationship. Root number 2 is nature, what today this conference is all about, nature connection. Root number 3 we call embodied peak experience, and I'll share more about each of these. That's being in nature, but as Matthew was talking about, probably other people were too, but I didn't know the language. There's a lot of research about the parasympathetic inputs of nature. We are very interested in that toggling from parasympathetic to sympathetic, like the challenge and the intensity. And he spoke to that a little bit. We think that has a lot of healing power, and there's neuroscience to back that up. And then at the end, the last root is helping others, connecting to community through service, how that kid can be useful, can make meaning with their lives. So with authentic relationship, we have a few points there, but the research, an American professor did this long-term study. Every baby born on the island of Kauai in 1955 and 1956, every single baby has been tracked their whole life, they're still being tracked. So it's a very amazing longitudinal study of, a population all living in the same place. The kids who struggled and recovered in any way, maybe they became alcoholics or drug addicts, maybe they were arrested, maybe they had mental illness, the ones who recovered, the number one factor was they had a consistent, caring relationship with a non-parental adult. So it's the relationship. We do that professionally. So that is huge. The other piece is, like those earlier slides talked about the motivation, how a kid has to have their intrinsic motivation to change. We take an alternative stance on behavioral change. So our therapeutic relationship is a container for the youth to grow their self-awareness, their own awareness of themselves. With growing self-awareness, youth start making decisions they don't regret. And that's it. That's the healing path. A very famous American psychiatrist, Bruce Perry, he wrote the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I love this quote from him. The more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. So simply, we are making a container for a therapeutic bond. The experiences we have in nature and the challenges we have build that. We love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh about deep listening is the type of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. You call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose: help them empty their heart. So our second root being nature, I'm going to play, maybe you've seen this. This is sort of a funny short video it's funny in the American context. So in America, the pharmaceutical industry has had a huge influence on psychiatry and on behavioral health. And so many of the kids, when they get referred to us, have been heavily medicated. It's very some reports came out 2 years ago correlating the popular antipsychotic drugs with obesity. They literally can easily see how they change the insulin sensitivity rapidly. It's like becoming a diabetic in 60 days when you start taking some of these drugs. Sometimes they're needed, but we have a lot of kids who are obese, and on the antipsychotics, they're very disconnected from their own sensations. So this this video is a spoof of a pharmaceutical advertisement.
Hi. Are you feeling?
So our television channels are full of pharmaceutical ads, and like that could have been an ad for Viagra for erectile dysfunction or something. But so there is so much amazing research, and in a way, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. Except, I mean, I know that a number of the researchers here are very familiar with some of the studies that have been done in the United States, and the top researchers in the United States look at studies being done in Scandinavia. From our quick survey, I think your culture is further along than ours. I mean, because ours is so big. It's interesting in the United States because healthcare is so expensive. It's 19% of our gross domestic product. Nature as medicine has become a conservation strategy. If we can show that time in nature will improve outcomes in healthcare, like for hypertension, for diabetes. They're not even worried about psychiatry yet, but huge public health problems in the United States. If we save money, everyone will start caring about it. Everyone will vote to protect wilderness. They'll vote for new parks. Politicians will support new parks if it reduces healthcare costs. So there's a lot of interesting research and government funding for that research about like the biomarkers of stress, that I know some of the people today referenced about, reducing cytokines and DHEA and improving vagal nerve tone and all of those things. And we work with some of the people that are doing that research. I mean, Paul and Johanna met Dr. Nushin Razani in Oakland. She's done one of the randomized controlled trials, looking at how much time families spend in nature and their health outcomes over the course of a year. There's a lot of interesting projects. These cardiac doctors started a thing called the Green Heart Project. They're planting 10,000 trees in very low-income neighborhoods in Louisville, Kentucky. Not little trees, 10,000. They're making instant canopy. Each tree costs $2,500 to ship and $1,500 to dig the hole. So they're making instant canopy, and they got baseline health data through all those neighborhoods on hypertension, heart disease, obesity, all that. And they're tracking the improvements. They're very well funded from the government to plant all those trees to make instant green canopy in the town and see how it improves health outcomes. So a lot of interesting things going on. For us, we are really interested in the sensory input aspects of nature. We know about attention restoration theory. We've hung out with those researchers, as Matthew was mentioning, Dr. Strayer and coming down from Art Kramer. But we know that is soothing, but we're really interested in how that happens. We think that as kids, if they can open their senses when you're out in nature, they're seeing movement at different speeds and different scales. They're experiencing time at very different scales. They're seeing water flowing, but they're seeing grass, or they're connecting with, plants growing. Their own bodies have that same thing, the same different scales of, their blood's pumping, their heart's beating, but their cells are growing just like a plant's. And it's not something to talk about. It's just something we think that if they can be present there and have, we guide them through different exercises to open their senses, there's that interchange. And we think that's very powerful. All the other stuff is super interesting, of course, the terpenes from the trees that measurably lower your inflammation and raise your immune system. That's all great. But we're very interested in the sensory inputs neurologically. So you heard a lot about nature research today, and like I say, there's good. The journals are publishing the European papers and the American papers in the same journals, so that's great. We have spent a lot of time on this other aspect. So not just forest bathing, but forest cartwheeling and climbing and running across logs and walking on rocks, and that immersive state where there is activation of the sympathetic. As Matthew said, that's very focusing. So you're walking a log, especially if you're out of your comfort zone, walking a log. You're not thinking anymore. You are in the moment. You are here and now. It's a little bit of risk. You could fall into the creek. With the kids we're working with, we might have to hold their hand when they're walking that log. But here's what we noticed. So many of the kids we work with, when they come to our program, they literally have a posture like this, like kind of a beat down posture. They won't even look up that much. They're just, and we do these weekly sessions with these embodied challenges. And 2 months later, their whole position changes, their posture, they look up, they might have energy in their step. And this is correlating with behavioral improvement, their ability to regulate their emotions, their ability to have a bad day and still deal with it, to face setbacks and challenges or resilience, and their relationships with their family. All are improving at the same rate that their kinetic and embodied confidence is changing. And we're very interested in this. I, as a movement guide, I was a climber and a professional dancer, very interested in this. And in some of the dance training I've had, helps me look for these qualities, the kinetic improvement. So yes, we this is our home area. We have beautiful cliffs. We can do that. But a lot of the kids we work with, this would be like 3 years into treatment. This is actually a summer camp kid, not an emotionally disturbed kid. But we do this kind of edge stuff, youth on the edge. I thought it was a good image. So I'm going to play a short video. Let me look at my time. I'm okay, not too late. We did a series of videos during the pandemic to bring information to kids when they weren't coming to school. And this video is called Playing with Balance. And I'm actually, just to wake you all up, before I play the video, I'm going to ask you to do one interactive thing in my talk. So I'm going to encourage you to stand up and just orient to where you are in space, and you might want to know where there's a chair to put your hand on, because I'm actually going to invite you to challenge your balance. And this might help for your drive home. It might wake you up a little bit. So just get comfortable and feel your legs, feel your weight on your legs. Take a deep breath in. Long exhale out. I invite you to close your eyes. Shift the weight over to your right foot. So move your hips over to your right foot. Gently raise your heel so you're just on your left toe, and then raise your foot off the ground. Okay, wow, very good balanced group. All right. It's somewhat challenging. Okay, one breath there. Breathing in, breathing out. Put that foot back down. Shift your weight over to the left foot. Raise your right. Keep your eyes closed if you can. So you're balancing on one foot. Take one breath there. Place that right foot down. Open your eyes. All right, how did it go? Okay for you? Okay. Okay. All right, go ahead and sit down. So this, there's literally in America, the famous doctor of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Dr. Ned Hollowell. He wrote the book, Driven to Distraction. He thinks this is a really good exercise for kids with ADHD. He says, we're going to strengthen our cerebellum. We're going to stand on one foot with our eyes closed. And there is, I'll show you, it's a little bit of neuroscience to support that. So we made this fun video. This was not made for researchers or professionals. This was made for kids. And I'm just going to play it for you. And it's about this concept. But again, it's made for youth to encourage them. Work well. I'm still, until it doesn't. Yeah. All right, well, sorry. Anyway, this is a friend of ours. There's a whole bunch of stuff we do in our wellness center to encourage kids. One is this exercise. But we just talk about how going outside, you can walk on rocks, walk on logs, kayaking, snowshoeing, anything that that's a little bit challenging, that gets you off your center and you bring it back to center, how that strengthens your sense of self. And that's the simple way to say it. The neuroscience backs that up, that that's actually happening neurologically. Oh, I'm sorry. The Finnish slackliner is my son. I always love seeing him on the video. So, all right, well, maybe we'll hear the music and I'll flip back to it. Sorry about that. I didn't think I could download it, and I thought it would play off the, all right, go back to full screen.
Now we know how to find it.
Yes, you do. Thank you. Thank you. Gateway Mountain Center Wellness Channel. Okay, so we go to the International Trauma Conference in Boston every year and have gotten to present our work there. And that's run by Bessel van der Kolk. Wrote an amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score. This last year it was co-led with Dr. Ruth Lanius from University of Western Ontario. She has done many brain scans on adults who had early childhood trauma. And I first met her because she was, her top grad student was co-presenting with a group of therapists who had developed an indoor therapy that was all about this. It's called sensory motor arousal regulation treatment. And the neuroscientists were showing their brain scans to support seriously emotionally disturbed kids in padded rooms, spinning and jumping and bouncing and rolling and falling and getting up, and that's a very useful therapy. But I was so excited, so I was like, I think this would work better outside. And I already had videos of kids going from here to here, that I was showing around the hall. And I'm like, that's it, the neuroscientists tell us what we're doing. Perfect. So in these scans, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but you can, and in the resource links we have links to these papers if you really want to study it. But our brainstem takes in so much of the sensory input. So the vestibular seeds, there's the ear structures, but those feed into the brainstem inputs, the vestibular seeds in our brain. The sensory motor and the proprioceptive all come together at the top of the brainstem, modulated by the insula and then connecting to the rest of the brain. So that is why balance, challenge affects our emotional regulation. They see that. I know that brain scan science is still early, so they might say something different in the near future, but so this is how it's supposed to work. When they have done these brain scans on adults who had early childhood trauma, they see very weak connectivity. And there's more boring slides that have like many, many, many brain scan photos, but you see a gap between the brain stem and the insula, the connections are very weak. This network is the default mode network where when we're at rest, when we're not in a focused attention. And a way to think about that is where our sense of self resides. And these children we're working with, you could say non-scientifically that they have a weak sense of self, or a fractured sense of self, or a wounded sense of self. You perceive that, like they trigger, they become dysregulated, and the therapeutic path is to strengthen that sense of self. And then they can regulate their emotions, they can develop relationships, they can face setbacks and challenges. So the growing theory, it's early in this theory, is that, and that's what they do in the padded rooms, that carefully supported, like the therapist is with the kid in the padded room, we are with the kid walking across the creeks on logs. Carefully supported, balanced vestibular activation can strengthen those weak connections over time. So yes, we want the funding to do brain scans on our kids, pre and post a year later, but it's what we see. We feel that this definitely could be the case. Integrating all the multisensory aspects helps somebody understand their own mental constructs and their responses to surroundings that comply with situational demands. So I love this slide, the embodied self. And this is the healing path, is to try to strengthen those neurologic connections. So we haven't seen a lot about this. Like I say, most of the research is all about the rest and recover, rest and digest, parasympathetic. We think that this going from sympathetic, it's a little bit scary, I might fall, to succeed, or even like it's too scary, I'm going to step back, take some deep breaths, we'll try it next week. That helps growth, that helps healing, that helps treat trauma. Our final route, helping others. Connecting to community through service. One of our first clients, and really reflecting on this, the work with this young woman completely informed coming up with this framework, because I thought about 2 years of working with her. It was one of our first clients. She had had 6 suicide attempts and 11 hospitalizations. And it was very unlikely, like this mountain guide man, me, and she was from Mexico, obese, and I don't know if you know what goth is, like black, everything black boots, black makeup, and everyone gave up on her. Like the therapists wouldn't work with her, the psychiatrists went crazy themselves. And the school psychologist said, right when we started our program, we did not anticipate that we would be given some of the most challenging cases. That wasn't in the plan, but it's what happened. And it's why today the government supports us, because we worked with some of the most challenging kids and we had success. And she was one of them. Her name is Gardenia. But I found some commonality. What do you love to do? She loved to draw. So yes, we bought all these art supplies. We went and we drew plants. We went into the forest and we did nature journaling. But one day we had to, she forgot an appointment with the behaviorist that she had to go to. I said, let's take a shortcut. And so we walked across the valley and we ended up, I said, we might get our feet a little wet. And it was our second session. So all I did was grow a little bit of the barest bit of trust journaling in a cafe so she would go on a walk with me. We're walking in the water and then it gets deeper and deeper and we're like up to here in a swamp. And she trusted me, and she went through all the things like a teenage girl, like, I'm ruining my clothes, my mother's going to kill me. I'm like, oh, they'll wash, they'll dry, you'll be okay. And she dropped into the zone, just like, a rich person that I take ice climbing. She might as well have been on the side of a mountain, a super overweight girl wading through a swamp. And I got it, like this is her flow state, this is her peak experience. We got to the river, it was all flooded, and she's like, is there a bridge? She's like, wait, we can't get any wetter. And she led the way across the river, and we were like eye level with the ducks. So we did more and more challenges. I bought chains for her boots, and we went on ice hikes. She ended up rock climbing eventually. But a year later, about 8 months into it, her psychiatrist called me and he said, this is going well. Are you going to keep working with her? If you're going to keep working with her, we'll take her off the medication. She'd been medicated since she was 10 years old. Her history was so classic. When she was 5, she was a witness to an older cousin getting raped. She was in the room. And it was horrible for the older young woman, but it's especially horrible for a 5-year-old powerless, right? That's like the worst trauma. And she had all the her diagnosis was borderline personality disorder. So he took her off the medication. We kept doing the adventures, and then she said, "I need to get a job." And I was like, "Let's get. I'll help you get a volunteer job. Or you should get a." I didn't even say it that way. I said, "I recommend. I can coach you. Go get a volunteer job with a well-regarded nonprofit." So I started picking her up from school every week, and then in between I would take her on a walk, but just taking her to the volunteer job. And it was distributing food to hungry people. And she spoke Spanish, so she was very helpful. Every Tuesday she would go home with 2 bags of groceries, some for her cousin's house, some for her house. She went from being like the drama kid, problem kid, mentally ill kid, to bringing food home. And everything changed for her family's view of her. She ended up losing 90 pounds, and she works full time as like in the kindergarten as a teacher's aide. And this is all. She's like 23 now. I started when she was 15, but or she's 24 now. Yeah. So it worked really well. So that trajectory of developing your own confidence, healing your own trauma, developing a relationship with nature, becoming embodied, getting off medication, but then the meaning making of helping others was hugely important. And we see that, and we look for that in those opportunities. Some of our kids, we have 6-year-olds on our caseload, right? It's not the same as a 16-year-old. We have booster chairs to do therapy with some of these kids. But that fourth root is really important. Some of these quotes, we work on ourselves in order to be of service to others, and we help others to work on ourselves, from Pema Chodron. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, from Gandhi. So that's our whole framework. And as I said, it was to solve a problem that was maybe uniquely American, but we think it's a useful framework. We teach this to parents as a framework, just to be a parent and deal with their adolescence. Authentic relationship, connect to nature, get those kids moving and being challenged, and make meaning with volunteer work. And we get a good reception. So does it work? We do an assessment with these kids every reduction, so that in the score, in emotional distress, in relational distress, in somatic distress. So these kids often have, somatization. It's hard to say that word, but they have tummy aches, go home from school, like all these embodied things. Critical incidents are getting arrested, getting expelled from school, getting hospitalized. Less of that. So the average is 30% reduction on the score sheet, because we have the kids who have a lot of drama, but that's still impressive. So these are good results. We did our own survey with a psychology professor from UCSF that was like a 360. So we interview the youth, but we interview the special education teacher, the psychologist who referred them, the therapist they might see, their mom or dad or guardian. 92% demonstrated over the last 6 months, have you seen progression? So it's a little less, as Matthew said, it's not mathematics, but we did it with, the professor did it right. Improved emotional regulation, improved resilience, the ability to face challenges, and improved relationship with family. An impact that's very hard to measure in our society is that these are the kids who drop out of school, commit violence, get addicted to drugs, or commit suicide. We can't measure something they didn't do in the future, but we feel strongly that we are reducing all of those terrible outcomes. And so does our healthcare system. So the hospital contracts us, 2 different county governments contract us, and we're still the only nature-based therapy getting reimbursed by government money. That's an outpatient. There's some wilderness therapy in Utah that can bill federal insurance, but we're the only one, and so that we get invited to conferences because of that in America. So that is I went a little longer because I wanted to have time for good questions, or any kind of questions. But I guess we started a little bit late. But if you have 10 more minutes, I would love to take any questions you have and talk. Thank you. Yeah.